Hey guys, um, we have a super fun and powerful workshop today. We brought in Kristin Sauchak to host it. The focus of the workshop is going to be on messaging. And so the way we've been thinking about it, whether you are thinking about telling your story to prospective employees or partners or developers or users or investors, you usually have just the kind of few minutes to tell your story and explain why your project should exist. So we brought in today Kristin Sauchak, who is an SVP at Walker Comms, which is a brand strategy and integrated comms agency. Kristin and I, oh my God, I looked it up. We've known each other for nearly a decade. We met first the day, like 8 ourselves. We first met at the Outcast agency, and I think that what her superpower is helping projects define their messaging and positioning. And so we brought in Kristin today to join us, to join the fellowship, to help you all get started with crafting your story. Kristin has a short presentation that she's going to walk us through, and then we're going to get our hands dirty and actually start working on our messaging. So, Kristin, take it away.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nina. It's so great to see everybody's faces here. I'm actually going to share my screen because, like Nina said, I have a very brief presentation to get us started, but we're going to spend the majority of our time working together. But yeah, I've been in the trenches of brand storytelling for nearly 20 years now, which is really hard to believe. And you might have seen this slide when I sent a little bit of pre-work your way, which was not required. It's more of a kind of a mental pre-work than anything. But what I've learned over the years is that if you're not thinking about your audience first when it comes to telling your story, you're already behind the 8 ball. And so that's why I sent the pre-work to ask for you to think about who are the key audiences in this moment to your company that will help take your company to the next level or even to its first chapter. I know we've got some early stage folks here. And then what do you want them to think, feel, and do? What actions do you want them to take when they engage with your brand? And engaging with your brand can be really any touch point. It can be as disparate as, responding to a job opening on a job board. It can be going to the website. It can be hearing about your company at a conference. It can be reading a tweet from one of your executives. But ultimately, we always want to be kind of obsessed with what your audiences, the ones that are important to you, think when they engage with your company. What do they feel? Do they feel trust? Do they feel excitement? Do they feel doubt? And then ultimately, what actions do we want them to take? And I sent that because of this image right here, which I think is really important to inform your story, which is that brand identity is something that most founders spend a lot of time on. They bring in consultants, they do a lot of whiteboarding, and that's a good thing, right? You need to have a collective vision of your company's intended image. But ultimately, the name of the game of how you move your brand forward is not your brand identity, it's your brand image. It's how the audience perceives your brand. And you basically get from point A to point B through information transfer, through signals, through all of those touch points that I talked to you about. And a lot can get in the way of these signals. Some of these are in your control and some of these are not. So a few examples of some of the things that are not in your control. And actually, this list goes forever, unfortunately. In the world of starting a new company, this list can be a rather long scroll, but economic climate, cultural contexts, political mood, what's going on with your competitors, media trends and journalist bandwidth right now. Now, this is generally in more general tech coverage. In the crypto and DeFi space, it's very unique. You're oftentimes not engaging with earned media as much or going direct to your audiences, but there's really a lot of limited bandwidth when it comes to journalists. And of course, there's a lot of headwinds right now with storytelling in crypto and DeFi with the various news cycles that we are seeing with those journalists. So there's a lot of things not in your control, but lucky for you, there's a lot of things that are in your control. Where and how you show up as a company, the personal brands of your executives. So, as a founder and your bench, as we call it, of folks you're building the company with may already have a lot of credibility and trust in the space that you're working in, how well you're prepped for issues and crisis, as well as these three things I have here in bold, which is how your company is designed, how consistent you are with your message, and great storytelling, plain and simple. And so these three things I have bolded because they're the three things that are the most important to control early in your company's journey. How are you designing your company to value storytelling and to empower everyone who works there and comes on board to understand why you exist, and what your company does that's of value and why it's unique? Really empowering people to understand that early is incredibly important. And then message consistency, making sure that you're telling the same story across all your brand touch points. And then, of course, like I said, great messaging. And that's why we're here today, is to talk about how to build great messaging, because it's tough. I see a question coming in here, and we'll take a minute for that once we wrap this up. Thank you for that. So when I'm talking about messaging, what am I talking about? There are a lot of brand experts out there, self-proclaimed and real ones. And there's a lot of different ways to build a messaging framework. Here is one that I think is really simple and straightforward for a company in its early stages. And I'm going to walk you through that. And we're going to talk a little bit about one element of this. Mission and vision is something we recommend that all companies build very early on in their earliest days. Mission being the change you seek to make in the world, and vision being what the world looks like if you're successful. This is really your North Star to all storytelling. It's why you exist. It's why you get up in the morning. It's why you come to work. We'll talk about one alternative to this in a second, but I'll go ahead and go through all of these. Positioning statement: who you are, what you do, for whom you do it, and why you do it uniquely. This needs to be defined as soon as you can in your company's journey, and it should be consistent. Like I said earlier, I'll be kind of beating that drum a lot, across the board. If you can note these four elements, you are going to be really set up with, for success with investors, with potential customers, with potential hires. Nailing these four things is really, really hard. They look super simple on a slide. I love to say them, but the actual process of nailing those is tough. And we're going to spend the majority of our time today on this element. Company narrative, the story of how and why you exist, the value you bring to your audiences, really important. It's kind of a long form positioning statement, really telling the story of your company. That's going to be the basis of your marketing moving forward. These two elements in gray are internal only, but I find very important: brand personality and your values. So what are the human characteristics of how your brand shows up? And then what are the key principles for how your company operates? These are going to be really, really useful to making marketing decisions in the future. And it also helps you make other decisions, like hiring decisions, really tough business development decisions. Values can be that North Star to lead the way. And then the most important element from kind of a tactical perspective are your key messages. Going back to that audiences grid that I sent your way, you want to create a list of your value props, your value propositions for each of those audiences to make sure that you are folding those key messages into all your conversations. Now, you don't need to be a robot. You don't need to be hitting a list of messages every time you're having a conversation. And they don't even have to be said the same way or with the same language from person to person. But it's important that the themes and those key messages find their way into really all of your conversations in some way, shape, or form if you are having a business driving conversation. So speaking with a potential hire, speaking with an investor, you're sensing the themes here, right? Whoever the audiences are that matter to your business and the goals that are driving you for the next year or so, you need to be hitting those stories, because you can really punch above your weight, if you will, if everybody in your company, which may be 4 people, is hitting kind of those same themes anytime they're having a strategic conversation. So, alternatives. Mission and vision at an early stage of a company may be really hard because you're still just really starting, within a project. You're still figuring out what is the tech going to do. You may start with the tech and then build into what your market is, what your value props are. You may be that early, and mission and vision may be beyond your reach at this point. So purpose is another great way to explore your mission at an early stage. But very similar. It's kind of, just a different label. Purpose really aligns a company under a common North Star. And it's really 3 things. It's what the world needs, what you're good at, and what you're passionate about. It's a great exercise to do at the early stage of a company to find your brand purpose right there in the middle. So I always suggest that with projects and companies that are early stage, because it can be an alternative, if you will, to mission and vision. So this is a litmus test I want to walk you guys through before we go into our activity, which is what is great messaging? And there's 5 elements in a litmus test that I recommend when you write any kind of messaging, when you write anything for your company that will be used for communicating its value or for marketing your company, it needs to pass 5 tests. This is another one where it sounds super simple, but it's actually quite difficult. It needs to be simple. That's the hardest of them, I find. It needs to be compelling. It needs to be interesting to somebody outside the walls of your company. It needs to be differentiated from competitors in your space or similar companies. It should be relevant to the times. So essentially what's going on in the market, what's going on in the greater macro environment, and it needs to be defensible, the second hardest one. You need to make sure that any claim you're putting forward about your project can be defended with data, anecdotes, examples, things like that. Now, those anecdotes can be pretty light, especially in the early stages of a company, but they're really important. So today, we're going to spend our time writing a positioning statement. Like I said, a positioning statement is 4 things. It's who you are, what you do, for whom you do it, and how you do it uniquely. Oftentimes, you'll see in its most useful form, it is the first thing you see in what we call the hero of a website, especially with an early stage project. It explains this is what our company does, but of course, it has a lot of other value there too. I'm going to show you guys 2 positioning statements, one that I think works pretty well and one that I think works less well. And I've chosen some companies much further along in their company journey in the crypto space. So the first one is Paxos. This is a company I worked with in the past, so I was able to grab their positioning statement really quickly, which is Paxos is the leading regulated blockchain and tokenization infrastructure platform. It's redefining financial markets by building prudentially, what a word, regulated solutions that enable the instant movement of any asset to anyone in a trustworthy way. Okay, so what's going on here? Let's break it down. When you look at this positioning statement, who you are, the leading regulated blockchain and tokenization infrastructure platform, a little too long, but it still works. 2, what you do, redefining financial markets and explaining why, or explaining how, for whom you do it. So this one's interesting because sometimes you need to lean into this one a little less, and sometimes you need to lean into it a little more. Positioning statements are a science and an art. So I don't want you guys, even though we're going to be having you guys fill this out, when you get into real world, I want you to feel free to be able to kind of suit the needs of your company however is necessary. What's interesting here is they say to anyone, and to anyone can kind of be a cop out. I tend to give clients the guidance like, your market shouldn't be every person on the planet. You're not doing yourself any favors there, but they have a real messaging goal here, right? To anyone, they actually are telling a story about how they're transforming the financial system. And their whole story is about they want to actually change how money moves. And so therefore, that's anyone, right? Anyone touches money, so therefore they are for anyone. So I'll give them the pass on this one. And how you do it uniquely that enables the instant movement of any asset. So when you break it down that way, you can actually see the strings that are going down to their positioning statement, which you'll see in their boilerplate, you'll see in their marketing, you'll see in their job posts, you'll see in their Twitter bio. It's really consistent. So the next one is Circle. Circle, similar company, is a global financial technology company helping money move at internet speed. Our mission is to raise global economic prosperity through the frictionless exchange of value. So this one I like less because you're getting less information. It's a little, to use a non-scientific term, squishier. So they are a global financial technology company helping money move at internet speed. Then they go into their mission. They don't talk about who they're doing this for, and they're not talking about how they do it uniquely. Now, they certainly talk about these things in other avenues. You can bet that when they're talking to their key audiences, they're going to hit both of those points. But when it comes to their most important kind of marketing channels, we're not seeing it. They're leaving it a little bit more aspirational. That is most likely a decision that they have made because they are further along in their story. But I highly recommend when you are very early stage in your project and in your brand journey, you define the 4 of these. Okay, so we're going to go back to your questions now.
So we've been running a company for 4 years now, and there's an image that we want to portray, and there's a way in which we want our customers to see ourselves.
Yeah.
I have found it very difficult to know in the end what it is that they actually perceive, right? And I can go and ask some people, some of our customers, but it would still be hard to know really what they do. So I was wondering if there are some ways. What I believe in is, in a way, I guess over the years, I've thought to myself, I have to keep telling the story over and over and over again, because that's the only way, right, that it's going to resonate. But I still don't know if.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's hard, especially, 4 years in. It's kind of a growth phase where you're not quite sure if you're just screaming into the void or not, which I completely understand. So I typically at your stage recommend that you have got both some qualitative and some quantitative inputs to help you decide if it's working or not, as well as just some business inputs, right? So one, you can't always connect brand directly to business outcomes, but it is helpful to look at how your business is growing and, various success metrics alongside changes you've made in your marketing, right? So it is helpful to plot that. But from a qualitative standpoint, I do highly recommend that you're talking to customers on a regular basis. If it's financially possible, tapping a third party to do that is always useful, but sometimes that's a big expenditure and you've got 8 other things that you need to prioritize. But finding an avenue to do kind of a small subset of customer surveying, or just even conversations is always useful. There's also a lot of, on the quantitative side, there's a lot of vendors out there for relatively low cost that will help you integrate surveying into your products and your web experience in a way that's less frictiony and less annoying. That said, there's always going to be kind of that annoyance level. So you kind of have to weigh the pros and the cons. Another way is I always say to lean on other audiences beyond your customers, your investors, getting their opinion, your partners, folks that are in your ecosystem that are always going to offer unvarnished opinions. They can also get to those audiences as kind of a third-party intermediary in some regards. So I say lean on them as much as possible. But then sometimes it's going to have a certain, it will always be a certain question mark if you're not doing those, direct touch points. But I'd recommend finding a way to have a direct touch point in some way, shape, or form, whether that's qualitative or quantitative, if at all possible. Also, social media is also a great way to look over time at, you can actually pull mentions and have a friendly robot, gauge positive, neutral, negative sentiment. There's a lot of tools out there that can do that. That's another great quantitative input that you can use to gauge. You can do beyond social too. You can put in, you can do Reddit, you can do other inputs. That's also useful. There is a certain amount of data cleaning up that you have to do sometimes because AI still doesn't fully understand human humor, but it can be useful.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
All right, Kristin, I know when the questions will start, when we actually get the worksheet in front of our folks, and they will have to work on their own messaging, on their own positioning statement. So why don't we, wait a second, Nikhil, you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kristin. So I think like Paxos and Circle are both, like, in my mind, much more institutional players.
Very. Yep.
And so their audience is obviously going to be much more institutional. Like, I think for Circle, for example, Dante is like someone who like talks a lot very publicly and is like very much someone who goes and talks to regulators, as he did when he was at Libra. Mm-hmm. I'm curious if you have good examples of more kind of like truly Web3 native projects that you're like, these guys conveyed a really clear message and like got like an audience for that. I'm sure there's kind of like an NFT project or even like a DeFi project, but I'm curious if you've seen a good example of that we can kind of look to.
Yeah, I think what I'll do is I'll grab a few examples while you guys are working on your working on your projects, I actually purposely chose like institutional kind of further down the road because I want you guys to try not to mimic them too much, because at this point, I want you to fill out these 4 elements kind of based on the truth and the current existence of your company. My goal is I want to send you guys a list of great examples after the session. But I am being kind of purposely cagey because I don't want to lead you down a road, but I will send you some great examples because I have some great people in mind.
Thank you, Kristin. Thank you, Nikhil. I see Natalie raise her hand.
I don't want to derail this too much, but we're a little bit more in the consumer application space.
Right.
And one of the dynamics that we struggle with or is a challenge for us is basically the dynamic between crypto as a brand being, a little bit toxic for people who aren't.
Dumpster fire right now? Yes.
Yeah. And so part of the thing we're trying to figure out and thinking a lot about is how do we, frame it for crypto users and non-crypto users when we have a product that could be used for productivity workflows as well as crypto workflows. And so do you experience your thoughts about that in terms of sort of company like labs level umbrella company and then also product specific brand?
Totally. So you are talking about one of the hardest challenges in messaging. This happens with companies like yours that have 2 very distinct customer bases, and then oftentimes with marketplaces where if you're talking to one too much, they kind of have diametrically opposed pros and cons, right? If you're too good to this one, then you're hurting this one. So it's tough. So ultimately there's a few things here. Number one, you've really got to come from kind of a mission purpose driven place as to have a big umbrella message, right? You've got to come up with a message and a story that unites and kind of creates this kind of global understanding of your company for any audience as your entry point. But then I highly recommend actually having 2 full train tracks of messaging for these different audiences and having marketing plans against both of those. But you've got to make sure that you've got kind of an umbrella narrative and an umbrella purpose that speaks to both of them. So that's why when you see the framework I sent or showed you, you've got some things that are across the board, almost all of them. Those are needing to speak to everybody and need to be really purpose driven. But then those key messages, you should have a plan against each of those. And you shouldn't feel bad about leaning into one over the other right now while you deal with the headwinds of the greater industry. Because there's no other industry right now facing greater headwinds. You know this better than me. So I'd say, don't feel nervous about putting all of your brand and marketing energy in one right now if it's going to help your company thrive, but don't shirk having an umbrella story that unites everything based on a mission. Hopefully that's helpful. I know it's hard in the to not be specific, but
super helpful. Yeah, we were even thinking even in investor comms, like for crypto investors versus non-crypto investors, even segmenting that. So that's incredibly helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, of course.